Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and welcome to the next episode of where we list all of the cognitive functions in most of the different slots. Today we're looking at the inferior slot. So this is where most of the types, if not all of them, are going to be on the chopping block of this is your greatest weakness until we get to the blind spot. And they are going to be told off for where they're particularly not that great at. So if you're the type that's easily offended by someone pointing out what you're not good at, I suggest you step out of this video because that's not my intention, as we're going to be treating everyone fairly and we're going to make sure that everyone is told off for what they're not good at. So yes, I'll even be poking fun of myself because ISTJs are our own worst critics. Oftentimes we hate the undesirable parts of ourselves even more than you guys do. So hopefully that makes things fair. And let's get started. The inferior function is sometimes referred to as the stress function or the repressed function. This is the function that usually most people hate it with a passion and often try to avoid it, or it's like a source of embarrassment for them. They see it as, oh, you're making me cringe. Because the way the inferior function work is it's always the opposite perceiving or judging function that's also the opposite introvert or extrovert. So for example, if you have introverted feeling, you're going to have extroverted thinking and vice versa. So unlike the secondary and tertiary functions where they often work together with each other, like the IJs and EPs are going to use a relatively similar amount of logic and feeling. If you have, say, feeling in the inferior and thinking in the dominant, you're going to see a lot of push and pull of like them battling it out to see who's going to be the dominant. Think of it kind of like a wrestling match, I guess, if you want to word it like that. And typically when this function comes out, it kind of unleashes itself in like the worst way possible during stress. Although some people have also described it as the unconscious function, where like sometimes it just happens to come out in certain scenarios. So you can sometimes present yourself as your opposite letter type. There's a saying for ISTJs in particular that says inside every ISTJ is an ENFP. And so I think like once you've developed this type, it can lead to you like taking on the best traits of your opposite while not losing sight of who you really are. Just like with the last video, we are going to go in order of my own function stack to make things easier to explain and keep track of. So we'll start with introverted sensing, which is the inferior function for ENFPs and ENTPs. When it's in the inferior, introverted sensors don't like to be compartmentalized. They hate routine and structure, and they often think that going by a tradition or a rule set is too limiting. They want to be free to express themselves and explore all the possibilities that the world has to offer, and constantly doing the same things and hearing the same old story over and over again just bothers the heck out of them. When they're embarrassed, they might like look back at a particularly painful memory and be like, ugh, I'm not that person anymore. Granted, I kind of do that too, but like for them, they use it so sporadically that it can lead to even worse panic attacks than what I have. When under stress, I've also heard it said that in particular ENFPs can get a bit too observant of their body, and it can lead to them like thinking any little thing is going to hurt them. ENFPs and ENTPs aren't particularly observant of their own body or their own routines. So that can lead to them being a bit of bingers and like going for so many experiences that they forget to take care of themselves in the process. When it's used effectively, they can have a decent memory. They just often won't make choices based off of it. They might use it as a means of like advancing the conversation or occasionally reflecting back on their past mistakes, but it's going to be very sporadic and very situational. I don't have any examples for ENTPs as, oh my gosh, those types are ridiculously hard to get a hold of on the phone because their introverted sensing is so low. But ENFPs, I've noticed sometimes they can be surprisingly reminiscent. They just don't focus on a lot of the sensory details like I do. They're more likely to remember the feelings that they had during past events. Like they'll remember how they felt and how each sensation triggered a particular emotion, and sometimes they can have that emotion replay when they're telling the story. They'll just want to move on to the next exciting thing shortly after that because that'll exhaust them. They'll often want to defy Myers-Briggs itself if they're not a healthy version of their types because they're like, ew, that's putting things too much in a compartment. I'm my own person. Show me some individuality. Moving on from that ridiculous display, we have extroverted thinking, which is the inferior function for INFPs and ISFPs. Usually when extroverted thinking is in the inferior, these types are known as the lazy types. They're the ones that are so used to living spontaneous and free and going by the whims of whatever they're feeling that it's often very hard for them to get things done and be productive. They often struggle with telling people what to do. They often struggle with being told what to do. And they don't like their lifestyle to be restricted by something logical. This also leads to them not being very great at logical reasoning in general. They're typically so in tune with their own emotions that to them thinking about an additional source or an outside source is foreign to them because that attacks their individuality. So a lot of times their extroverted thinking is reserved for when they're under stress and when they feel like their personal values are being attacked. The type that's most likely to say, is that a personal attack? Is probably the ISFP and the INFP, as they get super defensive. And when you say like, oh, you're being ridiculous or stop crying over spilled milk, they have a mama bear function where they swell up and say, excuse me? You are being such an idiot for getting on my rights and you're a phobic person. So oftentimes it's better to just let them feel things out. I don't like the idea of people believing in something that's delusional, so I don't really know the best way to go around that and be able to confront these types when they're wrong. I guess just do it with kindness so that it doesn't feel like a personal attack and it's more of, well, I've observed some things that you're feeling and maybe there's a new way of thinking about it. Whether they'll accept that new way of thinking about it or not is another story, but the point remains that they can be really defensive and really disorganized, and then if they're put under stress, they can kind of like throw things together at the last minute, and then it kind of looks like a jumbled mess. For introverted feeling, this is the inferior function for ESTJs and ENTJs. They absolutely hate their own emotions. They think that it makes them weak. They think that it's in the way of getting things done efficiently and that the emotions will slow them down. So a lot of times they don't like expressing their emotions too much. Although for some odd reason, despite claiming to be so objective and logical, some of them will go out and get drunk, and then in that process, drunkenness often leads to like you expressing the part of yourself that's suppressed, and then that's when you'll see the emotions come out, and then they'll be super embarrassed about it and be like, oh my gosh, how could I have let myself cry? That was so stupid of me. So a lot of times you'll see them say like crying is for wimps, like be a man, toughen it up, stop crying over every little thing. But the irony is that I actually secretly think they're more outwardly emotional than, say, an ISTJ or INTJ is. Because whereas those types are reserved about where they express their emotions, ENTJs and ESTJs, because it's in that constant tug of war, there are definitely times where the feelings just like, because they're so suppressed, they sometimes like spill out like soda from a shaken bottle, and they can like kind of explode with feeling terrible and telling everyone what they're feeling. It can also lead to them being kind of melodramatic because they're not used to thinking out their feelings and sorting them out. And so they often don't know how to control it very well. So that's where you have the meme of like the flipping the tables over and screaming like a banshee because you're all such a bunch of incompetent idiots. What the heck? So, word of advice for those types: Emotions don't make you weak. Where do you get that from? That's not even statistically proven. If anything, statistics say that if you don't express your emotions enough, it can actually give you chest pains. And that's not very efficient, is it? Oh, they're going to hate me for that, but I don't care. I don't have a whole lot of ESTJs and ENTJs on my channel anyway, so they can threaten me all they want. Not going to hurt me. For extroverted intuition, here we go, time to make fun of myself. This is the inferior function for ISTJs and ISFJs. To them, this is a paranoid fear of new experiences and changes in routine. Oftentimes, the idea of the future and new possibilities terrifies these types because they're so used to going by the same old thing and reminiscing on the past as opposed to thinking about how things could evolve or change. So this leads to them being, well, in my case, I've often had panic attacks when someone sat in my chair because I like to sit in the same chair. That's my chair. How dare you disrupt my routine? And it leads to them looking a little bit silly when the rest of the group wants to experiment and they're just like, no, I gotta have McDonald's. I always have McDonald's. And they need to learn that maybe it's okay if you try new things. It's not gonna hurt you. If I had to take a guess, I think it's like kind of like a Guinness World Book of Records type of complex. At least that's how I feel about it. Because I feel like if I don't do something consistent enough, then it'll break that record. And then I won't be able to have that title. Will anyone be able to see the title? I don't know. But I think deep down, a part of me wants to be recognized for my consistency. And like someone can say like, oh wow, that was really cool that he kept up that same fill in the blank for so long. When under stress, ISTJs and ISFJs can sometimes over panic about terrible possibilities that could happen. And in the case of the ISTJs, their introverted feeling takes over and they start to like have a personal panic over these possible events and thinking that they're a failure and they're incompetent and if they only did better maybe this could happen. This also leads to me being a bit of a catastrophizer where like something happened that was out of the ordinary. And so it got me to wonder if perhaps, I don't know, say a friend took 3 days to respond to a text instead of the usual 2. I would be so paranoid that perhaps I was being door slammed by that person if it was an INFJ. What could I have possibly done? Was it because I didn't say hello on my last text? And it leads into this ridiculous amount of anxiety and panic. I already have clinical anxiety. But the fact that I'm an ISTJ just makes it even worse. So what advice would I give to myself and other ISTJs and ISFJs to not be so paranoid? To coexist with the familiar is what I have learned. Use your extroverted intuition to occasionally branch off and try something new, but ask the person around you to describe what it is in depth. Don't leave out any details, be step by step and concrete, and also explain a good, in the case of the ISTJs, a good logical reason why something new makes sense. Because they're going to be thinking about, like, well, I don't need to change. Why change for the sake of change? I guess for the ISFJs, I don't have as much experience with them, but I imagine, like, if you can present a way in which something new will benefit the group as a whole, I think they'd be a bit more willing to bend. I've also noticed in myself, my extroverted intuition typically comes out the most in my jokes. That's usually where, like, my silly remarks come from. That's where I think my dad jokes come from. And it leads to me, like, having a very goofy side that often fools. Well, I shouldn't say often. It feels like it's very often when I'm sometimes mistaken as an ENFP because it's like a subconscious part of me. But it can lead to every now and then having like these off the wall jokes that come out of nowhere. Next, we have extroverted sensing, which is the inferior function for INFJs and INTJs. Oh, I know you INFJs hate feeling misunderstood and beaten down. But like I said, every type is going to have their moments, so don't cringe too much. When it's in this position, these types have a very hard time being aware of their external surroundings. I know ENFPs and ENTPs get that vibe as well, but in the case of the INFJs and the INTJs, it seems particularly embarrassing because When they're under stress, this can lead to them doing what's called binge experiencing, where they're so desperate to relieve their pain that they think physical sensation is the way to go. So it depends on the person what they're going to do, but they could like go out and have a bunch of sex, they could get drunk, they could overeat. And it also leads to them sometimes being a bit neglectful of what's going on around them. So oftentimes, like INFJs in particular are known for being the most disorganized and scattered of the judging types. So oftentimes, like most judging types are typically pretty neat and tidy and they like things in order. And INFJs are that one type that'll have like a messy desk, or they'll have like a whole bunch of post-it notes and they won't know how to take care of it because it's just too much sensory overload. And it can also lead to them like not really liking to just sit back and appreciate the moment. They're always thinking ahead so much that oftentimes they forget to handle what's going on right now. There's a stereotype meme that I saw one time of like sensor versus intuitive, where the intuitive was saying, "We must change the world!" And the sensor responded, you forgot to do the dishes. And the dishes are all piled up, and the INFJ and INTJ are like, "Oh shoot! How could I have forgotten to do that?" In my experience, I've also noticed that this extroverted sensing in the inferior can lead to them being a bit forgetful. Now, I don't know if that's actually the case or if it's just introverted sensing being in the eighth, but typically they need a lot of prompting if they're going to remember something. Maybe not as much as the ENTP does, because oh my gosh, there was one time where my computer broke and I asked my ENTP friend to help fix that computer. It's been over 5 years and he never got back to me. But I think INTJs and INFJs are a little bit better than that because at least they have extroverted sensing in the fourth slot. However, when it's used maturely, INFJs and INTJs often don't let the past burden them when it comes to their five senses. Oftentimes, when they have developed their extroverted sensing, it can lead to them being very in the moment and being able to have a really good time. In the case of INFJs in particular, I've noticed that like when they're enjoying themselves at a hangout, they are not going to try to compare it to what happened before. They're not going to say, "Oh, this is so different than the last time we did it." They're usually just like having a blast, and because they're using extroverted feeling, they are enjoying the fact that the other people around them are having a blast. So a little tip for INTJs and INFJs, find some kind of way to occasionally slow down from your future endeavors, because once you get to the future, then how are you going to enjoy it? What if the future that you envision doesn't happen? Remember that Jesus advertised himself as "I am," not "I was" or "I will be." So every now and then it's okay to just sit back and just be thankful for where you are right now. Next up, we have introverted thinking, which is the inferior function for, oh gosh, my hand just cramped. This is the inferior function for INFP, no, that's extroverted thinking. This is the inferior function for ENFJs and ESFJs. When introverted thinking is in the bottom, this means that they often have a huge reluctance to trust their own impulses, and they think that their own personal reasoning is irrelevant or flat out wrong. Oftentimes, these types don't like to come to their own conclusions about how things work, and instead focus so much energy on the group and outside harmony and their revolution that maybe their own insights could be proven wrong. The irony is that they're the ones that have the idea to start the revolution and start the group, so they must use it at least a little bit. Since it's introverted thinking, they're less likely to be forceful in the few times that they do trust their own logic. They're more so forceful about making sure that a person is being expressive of their emotions and not bottling them in and making sure that everyone is happy. It can lead to them neglecting their own emotions in the process, but that's more on the introverted feeling fifth slot, and I haven't done enough research on that to have a definitive answer. Basically, ENFJs and ESFJs often have to be prompted to slow down and accept that their reasoning is not the worst thing in the world. They might be totally off, like every type is capable of making wrong judgments, but at least they need to be willing to at least try, because for all they know, they might have actually been able to solve all the problems they're moaning about and they just didn't realize it. So maybe they think that they're the problem when really they're the solution. I never thought that would be the type that I'd be saying that towards, because I have so many negative experiences with ENFJs. Next up, we have extroverted feeling, which is the inferior function for ISTPs and INTPs. This leads to them being reluctant to be in harmony with the group. So oftentimes they'll want to be different, and they won't want to do what everyone else is expecting because they'll say that's too much of a mob mentality. Granted, I kind of do that as well, but in my case, it's a blind spot function, whereas for them, they're not exactly oblivious to the crowd. They just oftentimes don't like to act on it. They often say, why would I want to do that? It doesn't make sense for me. And so they often have to teach themselves how to use their extroverted feeling and actually give a darn about what other people want instead of constantly thinking about logic. Because a lot of times to them, because their introverted thinking is so high, they think so much about how much things make sense that human emotions and variables are just something that's too hard for them to grasp. So a lot of times they can be so cutting with their introverted thinking, saying this is how it is. How can you possibly not see it? When forgetting that maybe the person can't see it because maybe they have a disorder. Maybe a death just occurred and that's clouding their thinking. And to them, they have to realize, oh, yeah, there's these things called emotions that I have to think about. So I guess ISTPs and INTPs need to learn to be a little bit more considerate, but at the very least, credit where credit is due. They are way more considerate than I am. Although I think I've gotten better at it because I use my introverted sensing to reflect on my past mistakes and when people have gotten mad at me, and I'll be able to say, I don't want that to happen again, so I'll learn from it. Whereas I think for them, it's a bit more natural, it's just suppressed. Now we have introverted intuition, which is the inferior function for ESFPs and ESTPs. This leads to them not liking to look at the deeper meaning in life, and they often don't like hidden implications or things that are too cryptic or vague. They don't like really thinking ahead and looking for patterns. They instead prefer to live totally in the now and not try to think too hard about what the future might hold, because maybe the future will be terrible and not allow them to do everything that they want to do. Some ESFPs and ESTPs might get so stressed about the future that it makes them want to be in the now even more because they're like, oh shoot, if I get old, that'll affect my ability to run. That means I won't be able to do my morning jog. That's terrible. Not their morning jog, that's more of what an ISTJ would say. But still, they want to appreciate that while they're in good health, while they have the resources, whatever it takes, that's when they're going to enjoy life at its fullest. And the future is just too much uncertainty for them. So a lot of times, their introverted intuition comes out in stressful situations where they might overthink about what could happen and forget to live in the now. With that, we have covered all of the inferior functions. Stay tuned for the blind spot function. That's hopefully going to be even more fun because I'll be able to talk about where a type is totally oblivious to something, not just suppressing it, but doesn't even notice it's there in the first place. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Also, please let me know your type and if you relate to any of this, and also let me know if I completely destroyed you. And if you're mad at me and want to raise your pitchforks and unsubscribe and all that, please bring it on. Just be civil about it at the very least. I don't really like it when people yell or express too much emotion. Also keep in mind that I do read and respond to all of the comments unless the comment is way too vague, like, hi, Paul. But yes, I do read and respond to about 99% of them. So please leave your thoughts and expect me to leave my thoughts for your thoughts. Special thanks to my patrons Matthew Rakowski, Sploon Ghost, Splatcat, and Scooter Doodles for their financial contributions. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye! You can tell that's inferior extroverted intuition because when do I ever close a video a different way?